Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. It's produced by businessperformanceusa.org. We are honored to have you as our guests and know you will gain a great deal from today's presentation. Business Performance USA produces weekly webinars on Tuesdays at noon Central to provide business insights on a variety of topics important to business professionals and owners. In the very near future, special occasional webinars will be offered starting at 1:30 p.m. Central. Business Performance USA is a voluntary association. It provides online business information exchanges which may be engineered for privacy. When you become an open member, or sometimes referred to as a general member, you can meet people from across the U.S. who engage in serious business conversations on topics such as we're presenting today. You may become an open or general member at no cost to you and engage at any time. Just go to businessperformanceusa.org. One of the many benefits is that you'll be able to hear on demand all of the webinars we've presented at a time most convenient to you, including today's webinar, which should be available within a few days after webcast. Our webinar today, as you can see, is entitled The Trust Imperative, a three-part series, and we're beginning part one, Are You a Trusted Leader? The 5 Disciplines of Trusted Leaders. I am Dr. Jeff Stewart, first speaker and agent for the Board of Trustees, Board of Directors, and C-Suite of JAS LLC. My colleagues and I, both here in North America and around the world, all focus on growing your lead, growing your business, and growing your value. I'll be hosting this webinar for the next hour. Your executive presenter today is Cynthia J. Stewart. She is founder and managing partner of Evermore Services, LLC. Her firm helps you build tomorrow's businesses today. So we want to be sure that this hour is worth your time. We encourage you to post your questions using either the question feature or on the GoToWebinar control panel, or email directly to us if they're more extensive types of questions and comments. We'll see those that are posted to the question panel, and we'll get those answered as time allows. If you have very specific questions about any situation in your workplace or in your business, please feel free to email me at jeff@businessperformanceusa.org. That's jeff@businessperformanceusa.org. Or, of course, you can address Cynthia directly at businessperformanceusa.org. This webinar is being recorded and may be viewed at a later date, as mentioned before. Just visit us on site at www.businessperformanceusa.org. Just become an open member. Find the webinar recording alongside many others under videos in the member section. At this point, this is webinar 52, and we expect that we'll see over 150 by the end of next year. Now, before we turn screen sharing controls over to Cynthia, I'd like to tell you just a little bit more about her. Cynthia is a top-level executive presenter. She is a certified ATM in Toastmasters, and she's the managing partner for Evermore Services, your partner, as we said, in building tomorrow's businesses today. Let's look a little more at what that means. Evermore Services specializes in coaching your company's inner game in order to achieve superior results. Cynthia holds her MBA and is certified by the American Society for Quality as a manager of quality and organizational excellence. She is also a Six Sigma Black Belt and a change master. She partners with leaders in growing high-performance organizations through strategic and staged approaches to employee development, quality improvement, and business problem solving. Cynthia successfully led and directed culture change teams at all levels across 11 states during her tenure as Senior Internal Business Improvement Advisor with Central and Southwest first, and then after merger with American Electric Power. Including that strategic merger, She led assignments that created the third largest value generating utility in the United States. So during the last 10 years with AEP, Cynthia is credited with having guided thousands of people in hundreds of teams in accruing direct savings, that is, value adds to the business stream of over $150 million. And more than, as she moved through, the accumulated value of over $2 billion in value creation, that is sometimes referred to as indirect gains. Cynthia is clearly able to handle business. So what we're going to do now is turn the screen controls over to Cynthia and let her get on with explaining what she's up to with us.
Okay, thanks for that introduction. You guys might know that Jeff and I are husband and wife, and yes, he is my biggest fan, I think, but appreciate that introduction, Jeff. Well, folks, all I can say about the career that I've had is that fundamental to my success and fundamental to anyone's success has to do with trust. It's kind of interesting. When I was 20 something, I decided that my purpose in life, as I thought about it, was to empower others to trust themselves. And of course, buried in a purpose is for anyone is that you can do that for yourself as well as for anyone. So it was empower myself to trust myself. But I've long been interested in trust and the idea of trust and how to build trusted relationships. So I'm real excited about this webinar. And I do hear a little background noise. I hope folks are muted. Let me tell you that real quickly. I'm going to be talking about the trust model and 5 disciplines of trusted leaders. And these are observed as well as researched, by the way. And also I'm going to talk a little bit about your level of trustworthiness, which is embedded in this. And you'll see a little form there on my screen, assess your trustworthiness. I did email that earlier out to everyone. And so you should have that. If you don't, go ahead and email me at cynthia@evermoreservices.com, and I'll be sure to get that to you. cynthia@evermoreservices.com. So let's get started on this. I call this series the Trust Imperative. So it's good to talk a little bit about what is the imperative behind trust. And all I can say about that is that the work of an organization is accomplished through people. And people are interdependent. And when people are interdependent in getting things done, it requires high levels of collaboration. Well, you really can't be collaborative unless you have trust. Collaboration is actually built on a foundation of trust. You know, today's successful businesses rely on an engaged and collaborative workforce. And though we might credit Steve Jobs with many of the great things that Apple did, I can guarantee you that he relied on a large team of folks that were engaged and collaborative in producing one of the world's premier companies today. And I could say that for many, many, many companies. In fact, I know for a fact that where trust is the foundation, teams will be highly collaborative. And I'll give you some examples of that as we go through this. There have been numerous organizations that have actually researched trust in throughout companies. And what they find year over year is that where there is high trust as reported by employees to those surveys, they're finding a direct correlation to the performance of the companies in the market. And we're talking financial growth, revenue growth, price earnings, and that's what this little chart sort of shows you. The higher level of trust that's reported by employees in an organization, if they look across time, they'll find that the organization grows its earnings, its revenue growth, and so forth. So growth in the marketplace is definitely dependent on the trust within an organization. The critical link is high involvement, high energy, and it begins with trust. So hopefully people get that trust is the key factor growth in the marketplace. So let's talk about trust itself. I define it as strong faith and confidence in your relationship with others. And if you know about trust in terms of where it begins, it begins early with parents, and as it grows, it helps you and enables you to do amazing things. So we look at this picture, and this is a picture of a rock climber or a mountain climber. And what you notice is the person standing on the ground. I think it's a great demonstration of trust. It's a picture of collaboration here. And if you've ever climbed mountains, and I have not, but I've heard lots of stories of people who do this, and I think this is really an interesting picture for trust, because here we are with the person on the ground and the person on the mountainside, and the belayer is the person on the ground. And they're the one that is actually leading this climb. You always think of the rock climber as the leader in this case, but it's really the belayer. It's the person on the ground. They're the ones that are directing, guiding, and encouraging the person that's climbing. And this is just a perfect, I think, demonstration of what trust requires. It requires you to do great things. And as I said a little bit earlier, we start with this parent-child relationship of trust, but we also have to trust ourselves. I know that some of the greatest breaches of trust is when I trusted myself to trust someone else, or I trusted someone else, and they turned out not to be trustworthy. So was that a breach from them, or was that a breach inside me? And I usually found that I broke trust with myself if I placed my trust in others who then broke my trust. And it's a little bit circular, but I think the place we really start is within ourselves. We have to be able to trust ourselves to make good decisions for our lives. And then as we take on leadership, more and more leadership roles, as we become parents, as we become coaches, as we become church leaders, you name it, all of us in some area of our life take on a leadership role, and trust is foundational for ourselves and also for others. So the first discipline of a trusted leader is to be trustworthy. And the trust you build in your relationship starts with you. To trust myself, even I must be trustworthy. It's impossible for me to build trust with others unless I am personally trustworthy. And you see this leap of faith. This is a little child jumping down. We see them do that with pools. We see them do that with beds. There's nothing like a little child and their faith in their parents, their trust and confidence in their parents. Because what do? They leap. They abandon their fear and they leap. So that's what trust is. It's helping others to abandon their fear and leap forward into the future, into the vision, into the new relationship. Trust takes overcoming fear and leaping forward. So there was I did a little trust, a 1 hour sort of lunch and learn on trust for a director of a nonprofit. And it was kind of interesting because she, of course, reported to me that she had trust issues in her staff. And of course, you would think, well, people are not trustworthy on her staff and she needs to deal with that issue. And what came out during the little lunch and learn that we had is that she was not trusted. And when you peeled off the layers of the onion, the reason is that she would set her staff meetings and regularly be 10, 15 minutes late to her staff meetings. So she took the fashionably late idea way too far. And as a result, it really pissed off her teammates. They got mad because they felt like that she didn't honor their time, that she didn't have a respect for them. So just by fixing that one thing, they leapt forward as a team because she stopped being late for the team. It's amazing what things we do to cause mistrust on the part of others. But that's just a very simple example. So building trust around you starts with your trustworthiness. Now, I want to sort of pick apart this idea of trust and boil it into what's called the trust model. And there are three elements that are part of the trust model. I know a lot of times when I say to people, tell me about trust, who do you trust? They'll say things like, well, I trust people who keep their word. Well, yeah, most of us do. We trust people that keep their word. So we call that integrity. What we don't always talk about is I trust people who show they care about me. And that's very foundational, very fundamental, if you will, compassion. That's another part of trustworthiness that's very important, and also trust. You keep your word and you show that you care about others. And there's one more area, and that's competence. Do I get results? So those three things really make up this trust model. So we talk about compassion, how we relate to others. Do we show we care? It's really important on compassion that you show that you understand the point of view of others, that you seek win-win outcomes in transactions with others, and that you put the good of the whole above your own personal agendas. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. I had a interesting encounter with a top leader, actually a vice president in a company. This vice president would say things in meetings like, well, you can't trust your employees. I know that they're using their cell phones. We're going to have to take cell phones away from them because they're using them for personal calls. And what's interesting about this leader is that I call her a leader, but I happen to be flying with her from Tulsa to Columbus, Ohio. And when we got to the airport, I was planning to take a cab, and she said, well, come on, I'm renting a car. So we got in the car. She didn't know me really well, but we were on the same staff, lived in the same, city. And she never took any opportunity to really get to know me, even though we were on the same staff. So in the car would have been a great moment for her to say, well, tell me a little about yourself, or to just kind of talk and find out how we could get to know each other better. But what she did instead is she got on the cell phone and she called a friend to set up a meeting, set up a later meeting that evening, a dinner, if you will. So instead of I saw two things. Number one, she didn't try to understand, know, or find out anything about me. She didn't try to establish any level of trust with me, number one. And number two, all of her talk about we have to take cell phones away from our employees because they do personal calls. She spoke with that person the whole ride over to the business. It was some 15 minutes. She was on the phone on a personal call. So she didn't trust her employees because they might be doing what she was doing. The thing about leaders is that they're held to a higher standard. And if they want to be trusted, they have to be trustworthy. So these three things, integrity, compassion, and competence, are the three things that really are at the core of both trust and trustworthiness. So that's the first discipline. The second discipline of high trust leaders is this whole idea of relationship, and I talked a little bit about that in the former example. But the key about trusted leaders is that they want to relate with other people. They want to build relationship. Their key aim is to build trust and optimism in the environment, and they do that by involving and relating to others. So in every interaction, you have two opportunities. First is that you can build your circle of trust, which is through collaboration, or you build a circle of mistrust and collusion. And what I see is the circle of trust is really an emotional bank account of goodwill. The way that the circle of trust works is that you show that you're trustworthy. You see others as your allies and people that you can trust. You engage them in dialogue so you get to know them and you understand their perceptions. and you express yours, and then you commit to this win-win, this idea of win-win outcomes. Well, let's talk about that from the circle of mistrust. It's sort of just the reverse. In the circle of mistrust, you fail to be trustworthy. You begin to see others as adversaries, people you can't trust. You engage in collusive behaviors. You collude with others. And there's this us, them, we, they. It's always about the people in my circle and the people in everyone else's circle. And you kind of default to these win-lose outcomes. Where you need to go to work to eliminate collusive behaviors is to look where you have gossip and backstabbing, this we, they sort of feeling, the blaming, looking at people as incompetent, looking at people with disregard and disrespect, and I express that in the example. So the second discipline then is all about relationship and how you see others. Do you see them as your allies or your adversaries? Do you engage them in a dialogue, or do you tell them how it's going to be? End of story. Do you commit to a win-win where everybody feels good about the outcome, or do you say, it's going to be my way, sorry about it, but we're not going to do it your way? So those things in collusive behaviors really, they create a very poor working environment. And as we said at the very beginning for the trust imperative, is that those working environments see lower levels of overall results. Teams don't reach their objectives. People don't feel good about their companies. When they're out in the marketplace, if they don't feel proud about the company they work for, they don't represent the brand well. So there's lots of things that happen when an environment is one of mistrust. So let's move on. This is the third discipline of trust, of trusted leaders, and it is to collaborate. And I've alluded to this. The thing about collaboration is that it's built, as I've said before, it's really built on a foundation of trust, goodwill, and unity, with a commitment to win-win outcomes in a team environment. There was a team that I worked for or worked with at one point, and it's been a number of years ago, but it has a lasting memory in terms of when I think about trust and building trusted relationships and working in a team that collaborated and really reaching true synergy. And this goes back to the year 2000. I was working with the electric company, and I was selected among 4 other people to lead the company, which is 4 electric businesses in 4 states. They served 5 million people. And I was elected to come aboard as part of this team and prepare for Y2K. And it was interesting because we got together, locked ourselves in a room, and we decided how we were going to approach this, because we knew that it was a really big deal. As you might remember, in 1998 and 1999, there was a lot of talk about not being ready for the year 2000. And people thought that the electric power was going to go down. People were stockpiling water in their basements. I mean, the list goes on. So this team got together and we decided, what do we need to do? This is really big. We got to get word out to lots of people. Well, we decided that we were going to trust employees, give them information that they could take out into their families, into their neighborhood associations, into their churches, into their little leagues, you name it. Anywhere that a person was working for the electric company, we wanted them to go out and talk about our preparation for Y2000, for year 2000. And what's great about that is that here was 5 people, 5 million customers. I mean, if you think about how many orders of magnitude those 5 people were beyond, I mean, the 5 million in terms of orders of magnitude beyond 5 people, it was big. We had to think very large. We had to think very collaboratively. We had to engage an army of communicators. That's how we saw all of our employees. And so sure enough, the way it went is that actually we became known by the Institute, let me see if I get this right. It was IEEE, that's all I ever said, IEEE, Institute for Electronics and Electrical Engineers. They heard about us. I don't know how, to be honest with you, but we shared our plans and they heard about us, and we became known as the go-to organization for Y2 year 2000 preparedness. And we got so known that Sweden, a company in Sweden, called us and asked us to come over and visit with them and talk to them about our preparedness. And well, our vice president got to go. He wasn't part of the five. And we're glad that he did. We were glad that we were represented. We were glad that we got known internationally. All I'm saying is that when you get together and collaborate, in this picture you see that the green and the blue begin to emerge as a teal. It's when new things, new thoughts, new ways begin to emerge. So when you collaborate, when you reach high levels of trust, you could say that it can be heard around the world. But look at this. What does this remind you of? This sort of reminds me of Republicans and Democrats today. Nobody's winning. Nobody's winning. America's not winning now because we have so much collusion, so much mistrust, so much alienation, so much division. And I guess that's why I feel like we should be out there talking about trust, talking about it in our families, talking about it in our organizations, talking about it in our businesses, in our associations. Talk about trust. Let's start trusting. Let's start doing the things that can build trust. We're all victims of collusion, or we're all perpetrators of collusion. So it's a circular, I don't know if you can relate to this, but remember that collusion is circular and it's mutually reciprocal and it's a vicious cycle. Each person is relating to the other from mistrust and alienation, and one's behavior provokes response from another, and then that response triggers results in exactly the behavior that the other person dislikes and complains about. And people begin to gather data, what's right and what's wrong, and energy goes into building a case that protects oneself and blames the other. And each person receives that, perceives that their own personal motives are noble and innocent while accusing others of malicious intent. And each person is aware of his own intent, his great intent, and blind to the consequences of certain behavior. So both have the unconscious fantasy that the behavior of the other person would become worse if they did not do their part and really point out the failures of the other party in the case of the Democrats and the Republicans in Washington now. So I want to go back to my Y2K story because it was really interesting. I had the chief information officer call me one evening. I was kind of wrapping up in year 2000. I was in probably the year 1998, maybe the year 1999, but I'll never forget this. We were doing really, really well. People were engaged. They were putting forward their plans. Everyone in the organization had to have plans for preparedness, and those all had to be filed with the National Energy Regulatory Commission on time. And it was a bit, like I said, it was a big deal. Maybe that's why it will go down as one of my lifetime memories, of course. So the chief information officer calls me. Now, at this point, we had filed all of our plans. We were the first electric utility to file all of our plans with NERC, the National Energy Regulatory Commission. So we had met and complied with all requirements of the electric companies and many in the industry. And, we were rocking. People knew about us. We were communicating. And so, we had gone out to towns and communicated. We had made many trips out to our various towns that we served and had town halls to talk with community leaders and customers about our plans for preparedness. We'd actually called the commission. They didn't call us. We called them, the public utility commissions in all the states we served, and we met with them to tell them what our plans were. So we were really getting out there. We were on the road quite a bit. So here's this chief information officer from a major company. Calls me up. He says, "How'd you do it?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "Well, we haven't, we're late. People are behind and they're not getting it done." And, you know, I said, "Well, we worked from a very collaborative style, so we really engaged our employees and we saw them as our army of communicators, and we trusted them to carry the message, and we told them, where we were. We kept them informed, and we kept up with who was doing what, and we gave them awards, and people had their incentives tied to getting done and getting all of their plans in place." And I said, "What did you guys do?" Well, what did they do? They kept Y2K a secret in their company. Only certain, people were informed as to what was going on. They didn't let their employees, they told their employees not to talk about Y2K, to defer it to their corporate communicators, blah, blah, blah. So they were behind. They didn't make the cutoff date, and they were behind in getting their plans in place. They had a lot of commission complaints. I mean, you name it, all the scenario, everything you can imagine that was going wrong was going wrong. Were they prepared? Probably, but they didn't decide to approach this as a collaborative effort with everyone. They decided to approach it with a collusion. They built off of mistrust, alienation, and division. And only certain people were given the keys to the kingdom of knowing what they were doing with their year 2000 preparedness. And guess what? It didn't work. So collusion doesn't work. Now, communication style. This is a little chart that I think will be really help kind of lead us into the next discipline, dialogue, but also helps here. If you think of two dimensions of communication, as advocating and as showing empathy. So advocating for yourself and for others, and showing empathy towards others. If you're low on empathy, in other words, you're not showing that you really care about others, and you're low on advocacy, which you're not telling others your opinion, you're in this corner called avoid. And I'm going to use my mouse. So here we are in avoid. Low empathy, in other words, you don't show you care about others, and low advocacy, you're not really saying what your opinion is. There is a void. So in my example for Y2K, they were in the avoid. They didn't really think about the fact that all these employees were out there with their neighbors and so forth. So you could be very high on empathy, but very low on advocacy. So empathy is you really care about the other person, and you don't want to ruffle any feathers, and you don't want to have conflict, and so you're not going to advocate your position because that might upset other people, so you accommodate. Or maybe what you do, and I worked with a vice president she had 500 employees and served over 1 million customers, and her style was to dominate. So she would advocate her position, and she didn't want to hear what anybody else's ideas were. They were going to do her idea because she was the king of the heap. She was the vice president, and she was over the regions. So she got to say what the road was. Well, that didn't work real well. I'll tell you what works great in communication. What works great is for you to advocate you state your position, you advocate, you state your position, you state your perspectives and your opinion, you tell people why, and then you ask others, right? You show you care. So that's dialogue. That's where dialogue really works. Dialogue takes you showing your cards, putting your cards on the table, and then asking others to put their cards on the table. If you really want to build a team, you have to be in dialogue. And dialogue is two-way, or often you think of it as two-way communication, but it really involves, when it involves a team, it's a communication among those involved in whatever the issue is. So that leads us to right into the fourth discipline of trusted leaders, and that is to use advocacy and inquiry to gain mutual understanding and synergy. This is so important. As a trusted leader, your aim is to pursue dialogue among your peers and your teams and your colleagues. And, dialogue is creating, I love this graphic because it's creating a pool of shared understanding in an atmosphere of respect and goodwill in order to arrive at mutually beneficial outcomes. Taking our Y2K example, that synergy, we achieved synergy. 5 people were affecting 5 million people who cared about what was going to happen year 2000. And so we created this pool of shared understanding. How do we need to go about making sure everybody understands what we're doing, how we're preparing, that everything's going to go well, all of the plans that we have in place? How is that going to happen? We had to involve a lot of diversity. We had to listen to people. We had to give people tools that and we had to open up the gates and say, go communicate, tell them how we're doing. We had to achieve this mutual understanding and achieve synergy. So we've got to establish an atmosphere of unity, mutual respect, and goodwill. And as I said in the beginning, high trust companies do well in the marketplace. It's so obvious when an employee is out there representing your brand. They've got, maybe they've got a shirt on with, your friendly electric company. I'm here to check your to read your meter. And I want to make sure that it's okay that I go back there. And they're doing it with a smile because they know that you're there, that they're there to serve the customer. When the customer sees that, they get it. They see this light in the eyes of the person that they're dealing with from another company, and they know. They know that it's a good company just based on the demeanor of that person serving that company, serving that customer. So building that pool of shared understanding about what you're about, and making sure people have a full and complete understanding of the situation or the company, understanding everybody's point of view. You invite, you clarify, and through this you begin to achieve synergy so everyone wins. So dialogue is so important, and I'm going to go back. Remember that is empathy, all the way up on the high level, and advocacy. You want high advocacy and high empathy so that you dialogue in order to gain mutual understanding and synergy. Synergy, okay, to synergize. For some people, that's a new word. I've heard that word for so many years. I just thought everybody knew about it. But the way I like to talk about synergy is that it's when 2 people, or in our case, 5 people, can do the work of 100 people because of the way that they go about it to collaborate. It's when you get a great big problem that's well beyond the 2 people putting their heads together, but you go ahead and you tackle it because you collaborate and come up with the best ideas. And that's what's made, if I can talk about this, that's what's made this country great, is that we like to collaborate. That's what has made us innovative, and that's what's made us do well for each other. And so when we synergize, we're putting our best forward with somebody else's best, and we come up with something even better. And that's why we have such great companies, is because they've synergized and they've achieved more than the sum of the parts. That's what synergy is. So um, I put this picture up. It's ballet, and just for self-disclosure, just know that I am from a family of ballerinas and ballettists. I have a daughter that teaches ballet and has taught ballet for 5 years. I have a son that's in the ballet, and he'll be performing this afternoon at 5. And when I think about the ballets that I have been to, and I hope you've all been to a ballet, there are moments in a ballet where you can see synergy at its top and its best. It's where people are working like a, I hate to use this in a way, it's mechanistic, but like a well-oiled engine. It's when the spirits come alive. It's when everything is so well done that the audience can't help but stand on their feet and applaud with a standing ovation. That's synergy. We've all felt it. It's when a group of people have done a magnificent performance, and everyone that's been touched by it comes away feeling great about it. And that's what we need. That's what we want from a trusted leader, is to drive these kind of ideas forward into their organizations, their teams, their families. You want synergy, and you want this feeling of wonderment, if I can use that, because of this picture, this wonderful picture. The feeling of wonderment, those experiences that go down in the history of your lives as being, wow, that was a phenomenal experience. And by the way, yes, I did run hundreds of teams. And yes, I have many of these, but I just like to stick with one story when I'm going through a webinar. But I have many of these kinds of stories. When we got together and we put our heads together and we built trust and we related to each other, we reached synergy. I don't know how many of you watch NCIS. If you watch NCIS, you'll know who this is. This is uh, Jethro Gibbs. And Gibbs is Special Agent Gibbs on NCIS. And if you've watched this for years, like our family has, all of our family loves watching NCIS, whether it's one we've seen before or one we haven't seen. We watch many of their reruns, and we watch certainly every new one that comes up. We really look to trusted leaders in our organizations. We look to ourselves to be trusted leaders, and we look to leaders in our organizations. And it's really interesting to me because I've worked for so long now that I remember the days when all we ever talked about were managers. Nobody ever talked about leaders per se. It was really all about the managers. And there was this whole era in the, I would say, 50s, 60s, 70s, into the 80s where management was the big thing. And then I started to see in the 90s, and now it's escalating, how many times I hear leadership mentioned every day. I think it's because we're not developing leaders in the way that we need to be developing leaders. And so my hope for you today as you listen to this webinar is that you could give it now. You could go and tap into those places of trust that are important to you, and really talk about trust in the places where you have relationships with one other or many others, and just talk about trust. Ask people about trust. Use that trustworthiness assessment and engage people. If you've got trust issues in your organization, I just plead with you, let's start working on trust. Be trustworthy. Remember that it's 3 parts: your integrity, that you keep your word, your compassion, you show, and I don't mean you give lip service to caring, you care about other people. If you don't care, it's hard to not be authentic with that. So hopefully you can find those that you care about and lead those that you care about. But I got to tell you, if you don't care, you're not going to be a leader. And then there's competence. Competence is that you not only do what you say you're going to do, but you do it well. And if you know that you can't do something, then you don't say you can unless you are pretty certain that you can. So it's important to have the can-do spirit, but it's really important for you to be competent and to show that you're competent. Those are the things that make you trustworthy. And then as a leader, you have to build relationships. And those relationships are balanced. They're relationships where you look for collaboration. It's where you have dialogues, you converse, you learn from each other, you seek to learn from each other. You make sure that everyone in the group is advocating for themselves and their positions and their opinions or others. I was a great employee advocate. And that they're showing empathy to others. They're sharing, they're asking about their opinions and their perspectives. And with those things in place, you will gain synergy. You'll synergize your teams. You'll do things that will be heard around the world. So I really encourage you to think about these things and go through on your trustworthiness assessment and use it to your benefit. And with that, I'm going to see if there's any questions from anyone. And Jeff, is there anything that anyone in the group would like to ask? Any comments?
One of the things that has come up so far is a sense that somehow when you do, well, the question was this: could you talk a little bit more about perceived value? And following up on your Y2K story. So, a lot of successful Y2K projects have frequently been described as non-events, as if somehow they didn't happen. How do you actually persuade folks that prevention and sustainability are more valuable strategically and tactically than last minute intervention where disruptive behaviors are concerned?
That's a really loaded question. That's a really loaded question, and I'm going to sum it up in this way, which really got me through the Y2K experience, because personally, I was not worried about Y2K. I have an IT background, and I knew that they had been working on it for years, and that what we had was really a perception problem. But we did have to comply. There were things we had to do. And so what I learned and what was really important is to plan for the worst and hope for the best. So you can balance your optimism on hoping for the best outcomes, but planning for the worst. So what was the worst thing that could happen? Well, we could have people really, in that day, we didn't have so many terrorists. But in this day, that would have been a great opportunity for terrorists to really go and bomb out an electric facility or do things like that. Now, we did have one thing happen the night that we stood vigil as the clock struck midnight and it became January 1st, 2000. We had a line, if you can believe it, we had a line shot out. A line dropped, a very long line in our West Texas facilities. It was about a 100-mile line, and so it affected all these rural homes. And so, that was probably the worst scenario that we had. Fortunately, people were standing by and were vigilant, and we were able to get news out on the, in the newscast of what had actually happened, that somebody had actually shot out a line. It seems impossible, but that it actually really happened. And to let people know that we would get the electricity back up as quickly as possible. So for some, it seemed like it was Y2K, where their electricity would go black and they would have to rely on water. So we had planned for that. We actually had run events where people would communicate with each other, and they knew exactly what to do during that time. So we planned for the worst, hope for the best. Anything else, Jeff?
Yeah. Another question that popped up is so, how do you reverse course when the win-win turns into win-lose, and worse, when the win-lose turns into lose-lose? How do you exit that vicious cycle of devaluation and blaming?
Well, I gave you some of the tools for that. The first thing that needs to happen, there's two scenarios I want to set up. Let's say that you are being trustworthy, but you have others who are not being trustworthy. And what you need to do is to advocate your position about the importance of trust, and to then show empathy and ask why the people are not trustworthy. And if you use those dimensions of integrity, competence, and compassion and explain that to them, then you can start to turn the course into a circle of trust. So the key to this is to walk through it step by step. Let people know that we're going to start the importance of trust and that we want to build a trusting team. And if you have people that are so bent on not being trustworthy or not being trust, get with them and find out how you can make it better for them or how they can make it better for themselves. And if it just doesn't work, invite them to find a better place for themselves. Invite them to leave, in other words, leave your team, leave your group, leave the company. Invite them to go to a place where they can be more trustworthy and where they can have better trust. And I've got many stories. Unfortunately, I don't have time, but let me real quickly tell you that I had a programmer in that situation. I invited him to leave. I worked with him for 90 days. And he did a lot better with my leadership and working with him, and we developed trust, and he started turning in better programs and being more trustworthy. But the client, the user, wouldn't they wouldn't bend. And so I invited him to go find a better job and to start over again. And he did that. A year later, he saw me on the street and he hugged me. And he said, "Thank you so much. I have a better situation now. I've done a better job, and now I'm really well trusted by my people." So you just have to work to turn that situation around, step by step. But the importance is caring about the people involved.
So, what I hear is that when you work with high trust inside your organization and you nurture higher trust with your coworkers, what you're doing is sending that out in a way as a message of trustworthy behavior. So, in a way, it's like your internal trust factors literally improve the loyalty of folks in your market space. Is that what you found with customer service and satisfaction?
That's what we find. And I'll give you another example. This vice president that stood and dominated was really interesting because she worked for a company that had a 100-year history, more than a 100-year history. They were the pillar of the organization, and I'm sorry, pillar of the city and the state, and they were really well known. And she came in and really began to destroy the morale of the employees, and she began to destroy the relationship to the customer, and complaints went sky high. In the end, fortunately, they asked her to leave. And it was interesting because I actually had developed her trust because I had done some things for her that really made a difference for her. But I had developed her trust. And so at the end of the day, when she wouldn't even speak to me or look at me at the beginning of getting to know me, at the end, she actually called me up and said, "Thank you, Cynthia." And so by being a person that's trustworthy, you begin to grow trust with those that aren't, and you show them by example. And I don't know, if she really got better at being a leader. She had the instincts and the intellect for it, but she didn't have the heart for it. So I had to show her heart. I had to show her. So yes, by you can have ripple effects, negative and positive, in your world. And this person did. She was so untrustworthy, and she did, all the way out into commission complaints and lots and lots and lots of customer problems. And it was pretty dark before it got back to the light again.
So I hear you saying that your personal demeanor and your professional character make a really big difference. And even though you may not know it, that difference is made very quickly, just like throwing a stone in a pond. It's almost like somehow reaching into dialogue and taking your demeanor seriously are crucial to being able to not only accommodate what's needed to be done and how to get it done, but how to become adaptive. So I'm throwing the ball in your court in an area I know which is a favorite of yours, and that's adaptiveness in the workspace?
Adaptiveness is really, really important, and that is, what's so great about the trust walk, if you will. There have been so many times when I did things that I didn't feel like I was being trustworthy, and it really kind of hit on my soul, hit on my conscience, and I would have to go and apologize and say I would do better. Um, it was just really, really, it has to be important to you to want to be trustworthy. And so when you walk that walk and when you begin to develop trusted relationships, what you find is that you can get beyond so much stuff that bogs you down, and you can really create together and adapt together to all of the things that you get hit with in the business today and in the business environment today. So I think that you can create those win-win. And I'm going to go ahead and let you know, if you want to have more talk about trust and trust teams, I'm going to have a webinar September 2nd. Have you had your synergy today? 5 needs of high trust teams, and I invite you to come back if you want any more dialogue around this. And I'm looking at the time, Jeff, so I'm going to pass it back to you. But if you want any more dialogue, you can certainly email me at cynthia@evermoreservices.com, and I'll be happy to even do, lunch and learn series and other webinar. I'll do this webinar for you if you want. But I'll pass it to you now, Jeff.
Okay, this has been very good. I'm put in mind of the word dialogue. It's a very interesting word. You've addressed it in terms of 2 points of view or people talking with each other, but there's another sense of that also. The word dia means day. So as you take it a day at a time, be sure to be in touch with those around you. What I'd like to say is coming up in next, we'd like to invite you to be in touch with us for future webinars. On the 29th, we're doing quality decisions through individualized assessments with Matt Graham, who's a special partner of one of our client companies. And then on the 5th of August, Are You Leaving Money on the Table with Kenna Lewis out of Kansas City. And on the 12th, we're going to talk about how cultural excellence positioning drives value. And that'll be this guy right here. So please become a member, watch our full webinar series. They're on demand at businessperformanceusa.org. You can join at no charge to you personally and begin to work in the direction of exchanging valuable business information with other people. And again, if you have specific workplace issues, give Cynthia a note at businessperformanceusa.org, or myself, if you'd like to address that, Jeff at businessperformanceusa.org. Thank you.